Today on Tiny Voices, we're going to try to figure out why we have trouble making decisions in games and in other areas of life as well. That and more today on Tiny Voices. We are lousy decision makers. And by the way, we're also pretty bad at assessing our own incompetency when it comes to decision making. Many of us like to think that we're perfectly rational and that we can make solid evidence-backed rational decisions, but it is shockingly easy to tie up your rational decision-making process. For instance, have you heard of the 7 ± 2 rule? Even if you haven't heard of it, you've used it. Your social security number that you have memorized is 9 digits long. Your phone number is 7 digits, 10 if you count the area code. So somewhere right on the bullseye or just one number outside of 7 ± 2. That number is roughly the number of things that you can hold in your working memory at a time. Even your phone number or your social security number can be a little bit overwhelming for your working memory without the aid of a memorization technique that's commonly known as chunking, where you split the numbers up into distinct groups. You don't think about your phone number as 7 digits, do you? Normally you break it up into 2 chunks, same with your social security number. You break that up into 2 or 3 chunks. So why is that relevant? Well, in a renowned experiment, participants were split into 2 groups. One group was asked to memorize a 2-digit number, walk down a hall, enter a room, and recite that 2-digit number that they had memorized. The second group's task was nearly identical, with the exception that they were asked to memorize and later recite a 7-digit number. While walking down the hall to their destination, participants from both groups were unexpectedly confronted with a decision. They were offered a choice between 2 snacks. One was a healthy piece of fruit, and the other was a piece of chocolate cake. Now, the interesting part is that the group tasked with memorizing the 7-digit number chose cake in astonishingly higher numbers than those who chose cake from the other group. There was a wide, disproportionate gulf between them, in fact. The difference was too high to be a statistical anomaly. So why did this happen? This happened because that group of participants were so preoccupied with retaining the 7-digit number that they were unable to fully engage their rational decision-making process and instead relied wholly on an emotional decision-making process. Base impulses took the wheel and they ignored any possible dietary or health consequences. All it took was a few numbers to bog down their prefrontal cortexes and hinder their decision-making processes. And not just that, we have a laundry list of cognitive biases that impede our decision-making abilities in other situations, and we'll get into that more a little bit later on. Right now, I want to circle back around to why I'm putting this video up on my gaming channel. So, for instance, let's say you're playing Dark Souls and you just got back to your hub area, Majula, Firelink Shrine, whatever the case may be. You're flush with souls, and you hit the level up screen, and this is what you're confronted with. Options. So many options. A multitude of stats and numbers. Every point that you spend to level up is a decision. It's a decision that you rarely, if ever, get to take back, and it's a decision that costs more and more as the game goes on. So you gotta make it count, right? In Dark Souls 3, you have 9 stats that you can level up. Again, we're teetering just on the edge of that 7 ± 2 rule. And it is not an accident that it was designed this way. Those stats are Vigor, Attunement, Endurance, Vitality, Luck, Strength, Dexterity, Intelligence, Faith, and each one of those individual stats affects multiple other variables. Let's say I'm looking at just Dexterity. I'm assessing just that one stat. Why might I benefit from placing this 1 point here? Maybe I'm sick of taking so much falling damage. Unlikely, but, well, what if my weapon scales with Dexterity? Does my weapon scale better with Dexterity than it does with another attribute? Maybe I'll find a good Dexterity weapon later on, so I want to build towards that. Maybe I have one already, but I need more Dexterity to meet the minimum requirement to wield it. Hey, maybe I just want to cast faster. If I put this extra point in, is that going to bump me up against the soft cap? Did you notice all of the things that I had to factor in when assessing just one of those 9 stat points? Imagine each other stat point has a similar number of variables to assess. Suddenly, you're not just talking about 9 stat points, you're talking about dozens of different variables that those 9 stats affect. and your poor rational mind is trying to process all of that in order to make the choice between those 9 stats. At that point, you're going way over the bounds of that 7 ± 2 rule, and your rational decision-making process probably goes out the window pretty quickly. It can become really easy to agonize over individual points without some pre-baked ethos, some fastidious planning, or some other goal. This is why min-maxers plan ahead, because those choices occupy and overload your analytical mind so completely that you'll often just go for the haphazard, emotional decision of going with whatever feels good or feels right at the time. I put a point in vitality because it feels good to have a little bit more health more often than not. In reality, for what I'm going up against, it might not actually make the difference between 2 hits before I die and 3 hits before I die. But man, it feels good to see that bar move up just a little bit. The other problem with making a decision in the above scenario is that each point that you can spend to level up is a value proposition, and it's a very abstract one. We aren't particularly great at estimating odds or the value of an outcome in even pretty straightforward mathematical situations, which is why so many people play the lottery despite it being an objectively bad value proposition. We can pretty easily figure out whether or not betting on a coin flip is a good idea. There's actually an equation that economists use. You multiply the odds of winning by the value of the gain, and that gives you your expected value. If the expected value is greater than the cost of playing, it's a reasonable investment to play. If you play a game where you have to guess the outcome of a coin toss and it costs $1 to play, and if you guess right, you win $4, just by pure, cold, hard, rational, logical math, yeah, it's worth playing. The expected value of that bet is $2, and it only costs $1 to play. Things won't always work out that way, but the rational decision would be to play. There are a number of reasons why you might not, but they're not often arguments made by the rational part of your brain. And again, that's straightforward and simple. It's as simple as a coin toss. The more abstract you get, or the larger numbers you use, the worse we get at making rational decisions. Plus, there are literally dozens of cognitive biases that once upon a time in our genealogy kept us from getting killed in the savannah by lions, but they don't really jive so well with modern conveniences and decisions. You have the sunk cost fallacy, you have confirmation bias to contend with, you have the availability heuristic, the anchoring bias, hell, we even have a bias called the blind spot bias that prevents us from recognizing our own cognitive biases. And again, even once you make a choice, you can come to regret it as you imagine the alternatives to your choice and how they could have worked out even better for you. The moment you commit to a choice, all of the other choices and their outcomes seem so tantalizing. The better you imagine an alternate choice working out for you, the less satisfied that you'll be with the decision that you made. Barry Schwartz, professor of psychology at Swarthmore, calls this the paradox of choice. Let's imagine a different scenario real quick, one that I personally think about a lot. You come to a path that forks in 4 different directions. There's no clear indication of what way you need to go to progress, and which routes are just hiding optional goodies. You freeze with indecision. You're in the throes of what I tend to call option paralysis. It can also take the form of decision fatigue or analysis paralysis, as coined by, and I apologize in advance for the pronunciation butchering that I'm about to do, Jussi Halopainen and Stefan Bjork of the Play Interactive Institute. To crib their definition, analysis paralysis occurs when a player is confronted with so many possibilities that gaining an overview of what the different consequences will be becomes overwhelming and gameplay is affected negatively. Instead of interacting with the game, players are stuck feeling overwhelmed by the choices laid out before them. Anxiety levels rise, but actual tension in gameplay slowly evaporates. Do you want to know why I think linear games are popular? Because they don't produce that kind of anxiety. Sometimes I like to cool off with those kinds of games for exactly that reason, but again, that's just total conjecture and anecdotal reasoning. Anyway, Bjork and Holopainen suggest 2 ways around incurring the consequences of analysis paralysis without simply neutering the number of choices available. A, you can force the player to take an action with a ticking clock type device, and clearly this isn't how it works in Dark Souls, as once you clear an area out, you can take as much time as you want to choose a path, lest you fear an imminent invasion or something. Or B, you can take the gentler approach of limiting the player's foresight so the outcome of a situation or path isn't clear-cut and calculable. Since information is ambiguous in Dark Souls by default, the amount of foresight that you can have is naturally limited. Add to that the fact that you rarely have to completely commit to a path due to homeward bones, shortcuts, and paths that circle back around on one another, and you can see that FromSoft mitigates but does not completely remove the problem of option paralysis or analysis paralysis with approach B. Balancing out the player's stress level like that has to be carefully designed for, depending on the game and the experience that you want for your player. Games that present more decisions to the player need to be that much more carefully designed around the human capacity for decision making. And on the other side of the coin, it takes a special skill set to overcome some of our decision making deficits and for us to make better, more efficient decisions. Linked in the description is a helpful post on the subject from behavioralscience21.org. Before we wrap up, I just want to add this one final note. On a previous episode, I talked about Ken Levine and his ridiculous salad dressing metaphor with the BioShock Infinite box art situation. Doing my research for this topic in this episode, I came across not one, not two, but 3 different instances of salad dressing being used in metaphors for decision making. How is it that salad dressing became some kind of cultural touchstone or anchor to hang all of these metaphors on? Anyway, that's gonna do it for this episode of Tiny Voices. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take it easy. Have a good one.